So our next speaker today is Dr. Jose Pablo Leone. And I know his name was mentioned quite a bit during Dr. Ruddy's talk, so she paved the way for your speech here. He is the Director of Breast Cancer in Men at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston and Assistant Professor of Medicine at Harvard Medical School in Cambridge.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Sherry, for the introduction, for the invitation to be here with you today. It's always an honor to participate in this meeting and see some friendly faces. Hi, Patty. Say hi to Michael. If he's around, tell him I thank him every time I can for all his support and all the work that he does. So I wanted to give an update on the status of the ETHAN trial that we have ongoing. And to many in the call, this is going to be an update of what's going on with a summary. And to everyone who has not heard about this yet, I'm going to try to explain the rationale for the clinical trial. And feel free to ask me any questions, of course. No question is out of context, really, or not helpful. So it helps all of us to really think together about this and understand it better. So the clinical trial is a clinical trial for endocrine therapy in men with breast cancer. And as many of you know, endocrine therapy with tamoxifen is the standard and adjuvant endocrine therapy. Adjuvant endocrine therapy is the therapy that we do after surgery. So when a man is diagnosed with breast cancer and he has ER-positive breast cancer and he undergoes surgery, then we often think about tamoxifen for the treatment. And we've been doing that for essentially more than 3 decades. The reason for this has to do with the fact that we don't know in men whether other endocrine therapy options work, specifically aromatase inhibitors, which are abbreviated here on the slide as AI, which are a standard of care in women with breast cancer. We don't know whether they work in men or not. And also, another option that we're using in women, particularly in premenopausal women, is the combination of an aromatase inhibitor with gonadal suppression, medications like Lupron, for example. We don't know whether these medications work in men either. And there are uncertainties with regards to newer treatments that are coming along. So CDK4/6 inhibitors, medications like abemaciclib, for example, which is now approved to be used in high-risk women and men with breast cancer in the adjuvant setting. The trial that led to the approval of abemaciclib enrolled essentially approximately 36 men in the whole study, in a study of 5,000 women. And so we don't know a lot about the efficacy of these drugs in men and also the side effects of these agents. And particularly the endocrine therapy backbone, what we call the endocrine therapy backbone, which is what is the best drug that we're supposed to use to combine it with CDK4/6 inhibitors if we're going to use a CDK4/6 inhibitor for the treatment of the patient. So historically, we have used tamoxifen, but for example, tamoxifen cannot be combined with ribociclib, which is the other CDK4/6 inhibitor that is approved for use in the adjuvant setting as well. And instead, the combination of an aromatase inhibitor with gonadal suppression is the choice that should be combined with ribociclib, but for that backbone, the aromatase inhibitor and gonadal suppression, we don't have enough evidence to know whether it works or not. So it creates a challenge, and the challenge is only growing bigger, unfortunately, in that we're finding newer and newer agents that we're using mainly in women, and we're still stuck with tamoxifen in men. So ETHAN was designed to answer the following questions. Do aromatase inhibitors work in men with early breast cancer? Do aromatase inhibitors with gonadal suppression work better than tamoxifen, which is what we know in premenopausal women? And does the addition of a CDK4/6 inhibitor increase the efficacy of the endocrine therapy, which is also what we know in women? And if so, which endocrine therapy backbone or what element of the component of the endocrine therapy should we use to combine with CDK4/6 inhibitors? Should we still use tamoxifen or should we use a CDK4/6 inhibitor, an aromatase inhibitor with gonadal suppression? So this is the schema of the trial, and it's a complex study because we're trying to answer a lot of questions in one study for the reason that men with breast cancer is not a frequent presentation, and we have a lot of catch-up to do. So the trial is open for men who have a new diagnosis of breast cancer of any operable stage, so stage 1 to 3, and the patient has to have a tumor that is estrogen progesterone receptor positive, HER2 negative. This is the overwhelming majority of diagnosis of men with breast cancer in the United States. So patients, when they're randomized, when they're registered, they're randomized to one of 3 arms. And the 3 arms are shown here on the slide. It could be tamoxifen alone, anastrozole alone, or anastrozole with a medication called degarelix, which is gonadal suppression. So this is a window phase, the first phase of the study, that lasts 3 weeks. And the study is open, so patients know which arm they're randomized into. At the end of the 3 weeks, we do a research biopsy on the primary tumor. And in that research biopsy, we measure a marker called Ki-67, which is a marker of proliferation or how fast the cancer cells divide. So this part of the study looks at the difference in the Ki-67 expression from the initial biopsy, from before the time when the patient started treatment, until the result at the end of the 3-week window. Believe it or not, this marker with endocrine therapy with tamoxifen drops by half in women. It's a marker of how endocrine therapy works. So when you give endocrine therapy to a patient and endocrine therapy works, it reduces the level of this number by half. It cuts it down by half. The control group, which is the tamoxifen group, we are expected to see a reduction by half in the men that we enroll here. Anastrozole, if it works, it should reduce it by half or slightly higher than half as well. And if anastrozole does that, the only reason why the tumor would change the expression of this marker is because the endocrine therapy is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So what anastrozole does is that it blocks the making of estrogen in the body. And so the concern is that in men, because men have higher levels of testosterone than women, when you block the aromatase enzyme, the additional testosterone that men have will convert in estrogen, and therefore the medication will not work because the tumor will still be exposed to estrogen. Well, that's all theoretical. And so if that theory is correct, then this 3-week intervention will lead to no reduction in Ki-67. But if the Ki-67 does reduce, then it's suggestive that the drug is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And so we actually have evidence in the metastatic setting that anastrozole alone does work against breast cancer. But we need more evidence in the early stage setting to be able to change the treatment and improve it to what we have it today in women. The last option, which is arm C, is the combination of anastrozole with the gonadal suppression. So if the testosterone in circulation does limit the efficacy of the anastrozole, and it could be higher the efficacy if we don't have the testosterone in circulation, which is what happens in premenopausal women, by the way, where we drop the estrogen levels in circulation with gonadal suppression. Well, then this arm of the trial will lead to an 80% reduction in the Ki-67. So in women, tamoxifen drops Ki-67 by half, anastrozole drops it by about half to 60%, and anastrozole with gonadal suppression drops it by 80%. We know this very well in women. We expect that if these drugs work equally well in men, they should drop it by the same amount. After the biopsy is done, patients continue on the study, and there is a second randomization, which is that the tamoxifen group gets randomized 1-to-1 to continuing tamoxifen, which again is the control during the entire study, or adding abemaciclib, a CDK4/6 inhibitor. Notice that the study in total has 60 patients. So the randomization is equal across all arms. It's 20, 20, and 20, and then these 20 get divided into 10 and 10. Now, these 2 arms, we randomize them together to continuing anastrozole with gonadal suppression, which is arm C, or the same with abemaciclib. So this second portion of the study is trying to answer the question of, does adding the CDK4/6 inhibitor abemaciclib increase the efficacy further than if you don't add abemaciclib, on the one hand? On the other hand, should we combine abemaciclib with tamoxifen, or should we combine it with anastrozole and gonadal suppression? So the patients undergo surgery after 4 months, and here we look at how much the cancer has shrunk in the surgical specimen, which is a measurement called RCB index, to see how effective the treatment was. So the trial has two co-primary endpoints, which are the ones that I showed here on this section of the schema. The first endpoint for the window phase is the Ki-67 reduction, and the second endpoint for the neoadjuvant phase is the RCB index. So these are the two co-primary endpoints. In this particular study, we have two co-primary endpoints because we are asking two completely separate questions in the same study. The first question has to do with, do these options work in men, yes or no? This is the first question that we're asking. And the second question is, does adding abemaciclib work better than not? And if so, which combination should we use? Should we use it with tamoxifen, or should we use it with anastrozole and the garlics? So there are different questions, and that's why we have two different co-primary endpoints, because they're trying to answer different questions. We're looking at secondary endpoints as well, secondary questions that we're trying to answer. One is the levels of the hormones that men have during the entire study. So before starting treatment, and how those levels change during the conduction of the study. This is important because this helps us address the issue of this theoretical concern that anastrozole on its own doesn't work. So if men on the study have normal levels of testosterone, which most men do, and we give them anastrozole and the testosterone levels remain high or normal, and anastrozole works, is proof of concept that the level of testosterone does not matter. So that's why we're measuring the levels of testosterone, and also the levels of estrogen as well. We're also going to look at another marker, which is called PEPI score at surgery. So PEPI score is a method that was designed to assess the efficacy of endocrine therapy specifically. But we chose PEPI as a secondary endpoint as opposed to primary endpoint, because PEPI was not designed when CDK4/6 inhibitors, medications like abemaciclib, are being used. So we're looking at this endpoint still, but we're not considering it primary because we don't know whether it will still be reliable in the setting of using CDK4/6 inhibitors like abemaciclib. We're looking at the safety of these medications, side effects, the feasibility of doing the trial, and we're going to be looking at patient-reported outcomes, actually with a huge help from Katie Ruddy, Dr. Ruddy, who was the previous speaker, who has helped design these elements for patient-reported outcomes for men specifically. So the current status of the study is that we have enrolled 8 patients so far out of the 60 that we're supposed to enroll. The trial opened at Dana-Farber for the first time in October of last year. So it's been open for 1 year already. During this past year, we have also opened the trial at 7 other sites. I apologize that there is a typo on the number here. We have MD Anderson, Mayo Clinic, University of North Carolina, University of Pennsylvania, and Georgetown. And we are almost ready to open the trial at University of Pittsburgh. In total, there will be 7 sites that will be participating across the country in the clinical trial. These ones are already enrolling patients. This one's listed here in the bullet points. University of Pittsburgh, I suspect, will be able to enroll patients probably in another month or 2 at most, potentially sooner than that. We have the meeting to open the study scheduled for, I believe, the 22nd of November, I think it is. So we're looking forward to them joining also, and we're very excited that these sites have agreed to participate as well, because it's a huge effort that we have to do together. Now, if you're wondering, what can I do to help? So this study, as many of you know, has taken a lot of time to get to where we are, in that we have designed the study many years ago, actually, and it took a while till we were able to obtain funding to be able to open it, which fortunately, thanks to the help of many in the call, we have been able to secure. and the trial finally opened October of last year. Now we have to get the work done, and so we have to enroll the 60 men, and 8 patients enrolled so far is a great start, but that means that we still need 52 left. And so what I will encourage you to do is that if you know of any man who has a new diagnosis of breast cancer and that man has not had surgery yet, this is the key thing, is that they have to not have surgery to participate on the trial. Please reach out to me directly. I'm going to put my email on the chat box so that you have it. And I'll be happy to help the patient participate on the study, either at Dana-Farber, which is our site, or any of these sites. So we have representation from, the Midwest with Mayo Clinic, the South Midwest, as I call it, which is Texas with MD Anderson. We have a lot of representation across the East Coast from, obviously, Dana-Farber, University of North Carolina, University of Pennsylvania, Georgetown, and Pittsburgh coming up. We unfortunately don't have representation on the West Coast. We have tried to get the trial open there. We haven't been able to yet, but we're not going to stop trying. However, this is a question, the question that this clinical trial is trying to answer of these medications is a question that has been present for at least since the 90s. And we need the answer. And so I will encourage any patient, even if the patient was to live in the West Coast, to consider participating on the study. The study is a very short duration. It's essentially 4.5 months, essentially, and will help us and the entire community get the answers to these questions that we desperately need. So I want to thank a lot of people that have helped us a lot come to the place that we're at now and into the future. Here is Dr. Ruddy, the study team, which includes Dr. Ruddy, who was the previous speaker, among many other very collaborative individuals that have helped us get to where we are at. I want to thank you, the Male Breast Cancer Global Alliance, for all the support, not only with the conception of the study, but also to secure funding. Michael Singer has played a huge role in this, and also the funding agencies that have agreed to support the study and invest in these questions. So with that, thank you, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Leone. We appreciate you. Anybody have any questions?
Hi, thank you. This is Hari Nakshatri from Indiana University. I do the basic work on the normal breast of men. You're going to later on, I'm going to present some of the data, which does indicate that the PI3 kinase pathway is inherently more active in breast cells of men compared to women. So the question I have is, what is the why the CDK4/6 inhibitors got the consideration instead of PI3 kinase inhibitors? I know it is much more toxic than the CDK4/6. Is there a rationale for selecting CDK4/6 inhibitors?
Yeah, so that's a great question, actually. And it really highlights how little we know and how much work we have to do ahead. So I'll go back to the schema because I suspect other questions will probably also get the help of seeing this again. But this is a partial list of the questions that we have in men with breast cancer. Some people wonder, where is fulvestrant, for example, in this list of drugs? Like you were referring to, where are PI3 kinase inhibitors? And there are other drugs that have been recently approved that are effective as endocrine therapy agents and for which we have little to no data on how they work in men with breast cancer. Unfortunately, though, almost none of those drugs are routinely used in combination with tamoxifen. Abemaciclib perhaps being one of the few exceptions, actually. And the problem that we have is that we're stuck in box A, basically, for the treatment of breast cancer in men. We're stuck with tamoxifen, and we don't do anything else because we've never tested anything else. So we don't know whether anything else works. So we keep using the same thing over and over. And now we are in a situation where in the 90s, anastrozole was developed, anastrozole and other aromatase inhibitors were developed for treatment of breast cancer in women. By the early 2000s, they were widely adopted. The combination with gonadal suppression, I can't remember exactly the year that the soft and text trials were reported. I think it was somewhere around this 2017 or so. So it's been quite a while, actually, that we are essentially almost abandoned tamoxifen in women with breast cancer. Not all of them. There are many women in whom tamoxifen still remains a key treatment option. But in postmenopausal women, we now use aromatase inhibitors, for example, more often than tamoxifen. And in premenopausal women, in some of them, we use the combination with gonadal suppression. And so these new agents, like, for example, the CDK4/6, the PI3 kinase inhibitors, many of them are being developed in combination with an aromatase inhibitor or with other drugs that we don't use often in men. And so we need to know the first answer, which is, do these drugs work to begin with? And then think about rational combinations that will help even more than what we have today. And as crazy as this will sound, this trial design that you see here was designed in 2018, 2019, which is way before the PI3 kinase inhibitors and other agents became available in the market. But there are also drugs that we now have the questions as to whether they work and how they compare the efficacy in men as compared with women. So there is certainly more work to be done, even beyond the Ethan trial. It's just that we're still stuck with not knowing whether the partner of those drugs will be effective in men or not.
There is a question in the chat. It says, congrats on getting this trial off the ground. Have you considered extending this to the UK and/or EU? This may have the same answer that we had from Catherine Ruddy, and could that be due to funding?
So that is a great question. Yes, we very much would love to extend this trial to Europe and really any part of the world, to be honest with you, and actually even additional sites within the United States as well. So this clinical trial is run through a cooperative group called TBCRC, which is a Translational Breast Cancer Research Consortium. It's a great collaborative group that is comprised of a number of academic institutions in the United States. For regulatory purposes in the United States and for the contract of the clinical trial, unfortunately, any site that participates in the United States has to be a site that is affiliated with the TBCRC, unfortunately. And this is a problem because the interest goes beyond the TBCRC institutions. We have actually received inquiries for other institutions to participate as well that are not members of TBCRC, for which I would love for them to participate, but for regulatory purposes and for contracting, we unfortunately cannot do it. This is something that we're still thinking, though, as to whether this could be somehow changed, but it's difficult because you need a trial infrastructure to run the study to make sure that all the patients are randomized appropriately, that all the data is obtained in a quality manner, and that is done through a central office that is coordinated with TBCRC. And we also have to report any side effects to the FDA and to the manufacturer of the drugs, and so we have to make sure that those things get done as well. And so even though the study is actually quite simplistic overall, it still requires a lot of work that has to be done to make sure that things are done appropriately. With regards to opening the trial on other regions of the planet, funding is a key limitation there, unfortunately. Running clinical trials is extraordinarily expensive, and we would need additional funding to be able to open on other regions of the planet. We will also have to think about the regulatory elements of how we can manage the regulatory components of an international trial. but that usually comes after we secure funding, which we don't have at present. But we would love to have. It would help enroll the patients a lot faster as well.
Yeah. We do
So
have a
from
question.
actually, sorry, Sherry, it's Val
okay.
Spears here from the UK. It was actually me that posed the question in the chat. It's lovely to meet you in person, well, virtually in person. I think you've done a great job to get this started, but I think realistically, you know, you've only got 6 or 7 patients in the first year, so it's going to take you 6 years to reach the 60 that you require. So I think if there are any ways, I fully understand the logistics behind it, but if there are any ways to reach out to other partners, I mean, Ander is the next speaker, and you know he represents Spain, and we've been in touch recently about other things. But if there are other ways that we can maybe help to get this to reach the target numbers, I think it would be something worth pursuing. But well done for getting it off the ground.
Thank you. Yes, well, I'm very much interested in that possibility. We have to think about how we can get funding, to be honest with you, to be able to open it internationally. But very much thinking about how we can do to make it faster. One of the things that I'm encouraged about is that even though 8 patients is a lot less than 60, so logistically, when I mentioned here on the slide that we have these sites that were open across this time, so believe it or not, logistically, the trial has to open, completely open to enrollment at the main site, Dana-Farber, first, before it can open to the other sites. This also has to do with regulatory aspects of a multi-center trial in the United States, and is frustrating in a way because Dana-Farber is not necessarily the fastest in opening trials. I think we do a good job, and we can certainly improve upon it. There are institutions, though, that will open the trial faster than Dana-Farber, and if one of these institutions would have opened faster, unfortunately, they couldn't because we had to open first. So when we opened first, which was in October of last year, then the other institutions could process the opening. And so the soonest institution that opened after us was actually MD Anderson in January or February, together with Mayo Clinic. And I think it was in February of this year. So you can see there that essentially 4 months later, we added the other 2 sites. And some of the sites have joined very recently, a month ago or so. So the 8 patients that we have enrolled have been with mostly only 1 site having the trial open for a full year, and 2 sites having it open for essentially 8 months or so. So we're optimistic that for the next year ahead, the numbers will look better than what they have been so far this year. We're hoping, but still, if we can make it even faster with enrolling from other continents or other regions of the world, and also if you know of any patient that has a new diagnosis of breast cancer and you want to refer them to one of the sites, feel free to reach out to me. We can, the fastest we can get it done, the better.
Andrew, you have your hand up?
Yep. Thanks a lot, Sherry. Well, I'm probably need to introduce myself first, although I'm next speaker, so we can skip that part. Then my name is Ander Urrutikoetxea. My surname is not particularly useful to be used, so Ander is okay. So I'm breast oncologist in Spain, Dr. Leone, I'm really, well, first need to share the congratulations for the start of this trial. It's fantastic, and we will be producing some real interesting data on beyond tamoxifen, which is, but my question goes beyond that. Is the challenge on the approval of new drugs. Just imagine that abemaciclib proves to be substantially better in the combination than the hormone-only arms. I mean, because I mean, if you prove that an anastrozole plus the LH analog is better, that's something that we can use. There's no limitation on that. But then just imagine that abemaciclib added to tamoxifen or to anastrozole looks better. Do you think there will be room for approval of this drug And because if we were speaking female breast cancer, probably this would be a proof of concept trial followed by a large adjuvant trial with hundreds / thousands of patients, thing that we cannot do in the male breast cancer arena. So just imagine that abemaciclib looks better. What will be the next step? Do you think we can claim at the FDA or even at the European medical agencies that we could use abemaciclib for these patients beyond the current standard of use in lymph node involvement and so on? Because this is opening I know a big arena of discussion, which is the approval process for rare populations. And what do you view on that?
Yes, it's a very good question, actually. So the FDA actually sent a letter to industry agencies, and this was a draft. This was initially a draft guidance, and then it became a full guidance that is now published. I think it was 2019 or so when they published the final version of the guidance. In those guidance documents, the FDA urged industry to do a number of things. First is to do more clinical trials in male breast cancer, and that could be done in two ways. One was to allow the enrollment of men in clinical trials that otherwise would enroll women. And an example of that is, for example, the abemaciclib clinical trial, the adjuvant abemaciclib clinical trial, and also the adjuvant ribociclib clinical trial. So Monarchy, which is the abemaciclib trial, and Natalie, which is the ribociclib study, both of them allowed and in fact enrolled men with breast cancer. I think in the abemaciclib study there were 36 men or so enrolled, and in the ribociclib study there were, I think, a total of 20 or so men enrolled. And so that is one aspect. Now, on certain questions where you feel that you need to know the answer specifically in men because the treatment may work differently between men and women, the FDA was urging industry to do clinical trials specifically in men alone. And the other recommendation of the FDA was to do real world analysis of the data that we have on how drugs work in men versus whether they don't have activity. So both abemaciclib and ribociclib can be used in men, and in fact, in the current label by the FDA approval, men are covered in that label. You can use the drug for a male patient with breast cancer. And that has to do with the fact that they were eligible to both studies, basically. And so because they were eligible and in fact they enrolled, the decision was made to allow the approval to include both men and women. But we have never seen, and I'm not sure if we will see, data specifically for men in the activity of the drug. And not just the efficacy, but also the toxicity. So if the side effects were to be different, we won't know. If the efficacy was to be different, we won't know. And so we still have some things to learn, even after the drugs have been approved by the FDA, and you can use them as standard of care. And so I agree with you that the ETHAN study is actually very limited. You know, a study like this, which is a phase 2 study, would only be the first step or one of the first steps among the multitude of steps you have to take, including a phase 3 confirmatory trial. But in a situation like you were referring to, in a situation of a relatively rare disease, it's hard to be able to enroll 100, 1,000. Well, the phase 3 trial will require many hundreds, many thousand patients. The adjuvant trials of ATAC, for example, included 2,000, 3,000 women, big 198, and so on and so forth. So we have to think about how can we get data that we feel confident answers the questions of whether the drugs work or not in a way that is feasible and there is a compromise in that enrolling more and more patients would not be feasible, unfortunately. So what I'm hoping the Ethan trial will help is, on the one hand, answer the pharmacologic question of, do the drugs do what they're supposed to be doing? And if they do, which is the Ki-67 change, then it will give us enough evidence that the drugs are acting on the target as they should. The efficacy question, though, we have other sources of evidence to, obviously we'll have the efficacy from the trial as well, but we also have other sources of data, trials that were conducted in women, other retrospective analysis of efficacy as well, to give us even more information also. And then based on the results of the study is where things will change, hopefully more quickly than they have so far, in that once we know whether aromatase inhibitors alone or aromatase inhibitors with gonadal suppression work better than tamoxifen, then we can think about other treatments from there on.